What's up, peoples? It's EK. I'm back with our second part of our skill building living the process series. I'm trying to do some different stuff here, stuff a little bit off the beaten path of where you're getting in most of your Dynasty and Devy podcasts, and really try to do some stuff to help you get different tools in your bag for being a better fantasy football player, for being a better scout, whatever it is you come here to do. Something made you click on this and, hopefully give me a couple of minutes of your time. So, if there's other things that you'd like to see us talk about in this series, definitely let me know. Shoot me a DM, tag me on Twitter. But this is essentially a follow-up on last week's episode with Jake Estes and David Zach, who are both really awesome, well-educated, skilled data analysts. Both have background, doing that type of work, whether if they're formal education or in their professions. And ending that one, I thought we covered a ton of awesome stuff, but didn't really get to lay out in a step-by-step basis how to go about doing this work yourself. So that episode, if you haven't seen it, check it out, because those guys are awesome. They're gurus, they're guys I look up to doing this type of work. But this week, I'm going to try to walk you through a basic process that will let you start doing data scouting on your own, and not just relying on me and relying on other guys like me in this space. If you don't want to, if you're interested in this, it isn't going to be for everybody. So first step, and you did hear the guys talk about this last week, is we get a data set. And a few ways to do that. If you have a little bit of coding skills, you might be able to scrape a data set yourself. That's using a software program to pull data off of free resources online. That's how at least one of the data sets that I use is acquired. The one that you see here, actually. And this is my primary data set that I work with. You'll see some of my older models have tabs at the bottom that have data set from other sources as well. And I do, I'm using some stuff from PFF here. You can see that down here. I'm using some stuff from Fantasy Pros. I'm using their points per game data. I have, more PFF stuff here. This is Peter Howdy's data set, which I pay him for, right? I'm on his Patreon. If you're going to use these things, these guys put a lot of time and effort into making them. Definitely throw them a couple of bucks. I highly recommend Peter's data. It's intelligible. It's laid out in a user-friendly manner, and it is extremely valuable. The other guy whose data set honestly looks pretty similar, and who I also think the world of, is Dave, FF Spaceman. He has a similar looking data set to what I just showed you from Peter, and it's also phenomenal. So this actually I get from Jarek Backus. He's one of the Campus to Canton guys, and and I'll throw that in there too. I use some of the Campus to Canton data directly. I think Jarek acquires it all. He's got some programming skills. This is Campus to Canton data, but he also has a product that he calls his Devy data set, which is just a massive, massive data set of college football players. Over 10,000 entries, goes back 20 years. And that's not just NFL guys. It's like anybody who played a snap in college football at that time. So, my goal in working with that was to have the biggest, richest data set to start with that I could find. You'll hear some different opinions on this. And in fact, I recommend, if you got it this far, go back when we're done with this and listen to that pod with Jake and with David, because we have some differing ideas on what to use for sample size, what to use for data set in terms of years going back. So I've used this really large set, and it goes really far back. And I think that next year I'm going to try to curtail that a little bit. Also, I do think that while a lot of the data is meaningful for me, and I like having access to it. All of these other guys, other than me, only work the data set that's NFL players. So I actually built my models off of this that you're looking at is only NFL players, but the original data set I use is just everybody. So this is 21, 25. Hold on, here we go. So this is the the original data set. You'll see guys in here that even if you're a football diehard, you have never heard of. It is freaking massive. And I did that because, one of the ideas in doing data analysis is that if you have a large data set, it is easier to draw meaningful conclusions. But the argument is that those players that didn't go on to the NFL are irrelevant data points, right? That we want to look at how guys that made it to the NFL performed, comparing them to our other options of guys that are making it to the NFL, right? Playing fantasy football, that's, what we really ultimately want to be doing. I do some Devy work. Obviously, I like having more college players in there, but you'll see I do curtail it. If you look at the tabs on the bottom, and again, all of this stuff is on my Patreon. All of the work I put in here, you can make a copy of my sheets, flip around, do whatever the hell you want, take them, mess around with inputs. Let me know, shoot me a DM, teach you how to use it. And I do have kind of different slices of my data set that I use for different things. This one here is 21 to 23. This is kind of what I use for comparing the draft class to the, most recent draft classes. You can see here how guys compared in my model to an average player in my data set that had a top 12 season to the guys from the past few seasons. So you can see we are not operating at Jamar Chase or even Chris Olave levels, but kind of in the group right behind them. And then I have other ones. So this one, 17 to 22, this doesn't have the rookies in it, right? So if I have the rookies in it, I don't have points per game data. I can't make, meaningful conclusions about the statistics in the model. So this is what I'm doing a lot of my work in evaluating inputs and evaluating models on. And I have some other slices, 14 through 23. Sometimes I use things that go a little bit further into the future. I do create and use a teammate score. So I need to have a data set there that's all of the guys that these guys were playing with, so I can do the manipulations there. That's a little bit of a secret saucy sort of thing for me. I don't think most people have that, and I find it very useful in my model. So I'm not going to get into the details on that, but I'll say I find it really interesting in what it does. So step one, get a data set. Step two, I guess step zero, hope you have Excel and learn how to use Excel, because that's how most of us do most of this work. Certainly guys with skills in R and other, database or data manipulation programs will not use Excel, but most of us that are hobbyists that are doing this, for free and for fun, or, as a side gig, are doing most of our work in Excel. So if you don't have a ton of experience in Excel, there's a ton of great free resources out there. And also, I'll say the fantasy football Twitter community is awesome. I had so many guys help me work formulas I couldn't work out, just little bits like that. Guys that I don't even interact with all the time, that just I posted about a problem, needed help, guys help me. So don't be shy if you're just starting to do this and you're having a hard time to ask me. If I don't have an answer, I can possibly direct you to somebody that will have the answer. Honestly, that group of people are very much so team players and enjoy helping others learn. So, all right. So we have Excel, we have the data set. Maybe you've split it up. Jarek's data set does not come formatted like this. I do all this formatting, and I do it for reasons, right? So you can see like this coloring is shading by points per game in the NFL. So at a quick glance, I can see, these players have scored at a very high level. These players have been productive. These guys have not yet met thresholds that I would like them to. Burks, Gallup has never hit it. All right. So First thing that I think is useful for you to do after that, and I wouldn't go a ton into formatting right away. I think that'll probably be something you'll explore as you get more used to your data set. Now, again, if you use Peter or Spaceman's set, they've done that work for you. So in a lot of ways, it's a little cleaner set than mine. I do use, you'll see a lot of conditional formatting as you get into it, right? Shading, on a gradient with things being good or bad, particularly for my models themselves. I used to do it for everything, and it turns into a really messy looking data set. So went away from that a little bit. So next step that I would suggest would be to use a simple formula, correlate, which essentially calculates the correlation coefficient for two arrays, two sets of data, right, which is two columns here. Each one of these columns can be an array. Correlation coefficient will tell you in a simple numerical manner if the two sets vary together, right? So as one number goes up, does the other number go up, right? That's basically what this is telling you. And I took and did a simple conditional formatting to kind of highlight the things that did have a high correlation coefficient. So these aren't necessarily saying that these are going to be the most predictive stats to put in a model. There's different tests that we use to do that I'll get into in a minute. But if they're not correlated, it's unlikely they belong in your model, right? Or at least, if there's no correlation, they have no business being in a model. If they're slightly correlated, maybe they're worth investigating more, doing p-tests and really measuring our squared width. But a short version of knowing what stats are worth more investigation would be just to do this. This is set to highlight in blue anything that was over like 0.22, which that's a significant correlation. The scale is between 0 and 100. 100 is a 1-for-1 correlation, so it's the same data set. As you get closer to that, it's more related to each other. But really, anything like over 0.1, 0.2 would show some kind of correlation. So this is interesting too. I haven't done this part of it in a while, but I actually like some year 3 stats. I find them to have good p-values, and they didn't correlate as well as year 1 and 2 receptions. And when I say correlate, I'm correlating these to fantasy points per game, career fantasy points per game. So you can see receptions years 1 and 2 correlated pretty well. Receptions average correlated well. Makes sense. So when he's getting the ball, he might be a good receiver. Receiving yards, years 1 and 2, receiving yards average. I do use some best season stats as well. I feel like you pick up slightly different sets of players when you throw some best season stuff in. Some people swear by it. I use more averages than I do best. And you can see why, because I find that they are more related to success in the NFL. I do throw some in there. I forget exactly what's in my model right now. I'd have to look. You see receiving touchdowns have pretty good correlation. Year 2, for some reason, very strong. Year 5, strongly related. I would advise against using any year 5 stats. In fact, I don't like using any year 4 stats. And if you're using best season stats, you need to be careful that you're not picking up 1-year wonder guys, but typically tempering them with some career average stats gets rid of those guys. It drops them really far down. My other thought on that personally is to use best of first 3 Elden Ring best stats of the first 3 seasons, right? So you're kind of eliminating those 4th-year superstars that generally don't pan out for fantasy football. So Some other stuff, scrimmage yards can be interesting. I've tried those as inputs. I think I'm back to receiving yards right now. You can see receiving yards, market share average has a really significant correlation. Receiving yards, market share average has a really high correlation. I do like using these stats. I would advise you don't use them and dominator at the same time because you're overlapping, right? There's a facet of data analysis we talk about called collinearity. And essentially that means if you have two stats in your model that are telling the model the same thing or they're running together, you're overweighting those more than you might intend to. So try not to use things that overlap that much. There's a simple test you can do. It's a function in here. I'll get to some of this stuff later. Might not get too much into that. Hey, Dave, what's up, dude? Shout out, Howard. Sorry, I got distracted. So I might not get into collinearity testing, but I'll certainly get into basic linear regression, right? Because that's really when we talk about a model, what we're talking about is a linear regression model, sometimes quadratic regression model, although most people don't get too much into that. If you listen to David Zach, he does some of that. The other type of scouting people do with data is buckets analysis, which is essentially saying these stats are similar to this group of players. These stats are similar to this group of people. I'm not experienced in that, so I'm not going to try to teach you that. I'm just going to try to focus on what I know, and frankly, this is what 95% of data analysts that work in fantasy football do. So you can see here's one of the big ones, receiving yards per team pass attempt. Again, some people use best, some people use average. Touchdown between team pass attempt, moving overlap. David, dude, you might know more stuff about this than I do, man. I don't. I have learned this stuff on the fly. I mean, I'm pretty educated, but I'm a construction guy. I haven't been in college in 20 years, So honestly, Jake taught me some of this stuff. Guys like Peter helped me when I was starting out in it. Most of these guys are pretty cool. So dominant rating, pretty interesting. A lot of people use it as an input. I don't know. I don't have it in my model right now, but I am using a lot of the things that make up dominator rating, right? That's, again, we're talking about removing overlap. So scrimmage yards per play. I think there's probably a significant overlap between scrimmage yards per play and receiving yards for team pass attempt. Obviously, scrimmage yards per play is picking up rushing attempts as well. And it's also measuring it's using all plays as a sample set instead of just pass attempts, right? Which is what you're getting receiving yards per team pass attempts. So running backs, you probably want to be talking about scrimmage yards per team play. Wide receivers, I can totally make an argument to do either. Like, do you want to pick up the Debo Samuel type sample? I did more of that last year. This year I've kind of gone away to it because the guy's not great as a strict receiver. You're probably picking up more outliers than you are useful players. So EPA is something I've got very much so into in the past 2 years. If you're not familiar, it's expected points added. So it's a little bit more kind of secondary calculations that the data providers do. And essentially, in a given scenario, like it's third down on the 20-yard line, there's a certain amount of expected points in that situation, just from the massive data set of all NFL plays that they have in these databases, right? If a wide receiver then, catches a first down, right? Makes a big play, or a running back breaks a big run, and now they have brought the line of scrimmage to like first and goal or something. They've added a certain amount of expected points. So this is doing that calculation kind of on every. Cover the stats to listen to others. There's always people that are smarter than us, man. I don't even think I'm necessarily one of the smartest guys doing this, but a lot of it just a little bit of practice and like you're doing, just learning from other people. That's all I've done. Peter's got a bunch of videos, man. He explains a lot of stuff really well. So that's expected points added. It is relevant. So this is in a lot of my models at this point. And honestly, I think it's kind of a secret saucy sort of thing that a lot of models don't have it. And I think it's really beneficial. So I could spend a month talking about which one of these to use, but you can see average EPA year 3 is pretty useful. Average EPA average is, I think, what's actually in my models. And that's basically the average of every play they played. So total EPA is more predictive, but it's also it's compiling, right? It's aggregating. So every play they play, it adds to it. So if you use total EPA, you're kind of using a counting stat in a manner, right? People that played more games will have higher total EPA. So I think that can be a little bit noisy, but you will see. I mean, that's 0.36. That's a phenomenal correlation coefficient. So if you're, trying to make something that's simple, it doesn't have a lot of stats, this might be an interesting thing. So I am doing nothing right now with athletic measures except for including 40. Again, I haven't done this recently, but you look, the vertical is actually highly correlated to fantasy points per game, which is kind of interesting. It's an explosiveness measure. 40 is negatively related, but I don't use it as an actual modifier in the model. I use it as a gate. So if you have like a really terrible 40, you get knocked in my model, right? I'll try to just fly through a little bit more of this. I don't want this to go on too long. I don't want people to get super bored of just looking at me looking in the spreadsheet. So, so this here is PFF data. Don't know why this isn't working. It's not working. So some of this stuff is interesting. Most of it I haven't found to be. The point too is I forget what actually becomes meaningful, but it's a pretty low number, right? Becomes statistically meaningful. I'd rather have things that are more meaningful than less meaningful, right? So for me, that's where something becomes like somewhat interesting. And I'll say this though, there's things in my model that actually have shitty p-values and shitty correlation, but I like what they do to the model. They're just saying all models are wrong, but some of them are useful, right? So I do apply some common sense and some kind of intuitive stuff at times, which, that's a departure from like rigorous data analysis, but I don't know, man, this is, trying to win fantasy football games here. So p-value is a measure. I'll show you that in a little bit. When we're doing a linear regression model, the p-value is a value that comes back. It's a test that it runs when you run the model with the tool that I'm showing you. It's also a separate statistical test that you could do with pencil and paper if you knew how to do it. I couldn't begin to explain to someone how to do it now, but p-value essentially tells you whether or not a stat is useful as an input to the model. It'll tell you whether it improves the model or has value to the model, right? And it's kind of the same thing. If you get a p-value, this is, I will get back to that in like 1 second. I have some p-values saved. I don't want to really run a bunch of stuff right now, but I'll show you some stuff that I ran on some of these stats. But that's essentially it. When you do a linear regression analysis, it's going to give you a p-value for all the stats you included in it. And if the p-value is very poor, you should probably throw them out. That's the short answer. You see some of the Canvas and Canton stuff. I have this in here because it's all pre-game played, where my main data set doesn't give me that. A lot of this is more highly correlated than a lot of the other stuff. So the nuts and bolts. How do you go about building a model? So now you have some statistics that are interesting to you. You testing or moving. Yeah, honestly, David, that's pretty much what I have done. This when you run the linear regression analysis, there's programs that you can run it with a ton of variables and they'll spit you back p-values for all of them. Excel can only handle about 5 values at a time. So you're kind of doing a little bit of like guessing and checking, right? I'm going to throw, I did tests on literally every variable and then just threw out stuff, every variable that seemed remotely useful, and just threw out stuff that really had a poor R-squared or poor p-value, except as I kept some things as kind of an indulgence to myself because I like the stats, I found them useful. So you see at the end, this is the area that how strong an input is. Honestly, I feel like the exact definition is how much it matters to the model. How much does it explain variance? Let's look this up. P-test. Lest I give you bad information. P-values defines probability under assumption of no effect or no difference, obtaining a result equal to or more extreme. Stands for probability, measures how likely it is that any observed difference between groups is due to chance. So essentially, the p-value is telling you that the variation isn't just due to chance, right? If it's got a better p-value there. So you can see my model's all chopped up. These are essentially versions of it where I add or subtract something because I liked what I was adding with things. Your R-squared is what an R-squared means is it's the line of best fit. So we're really like visualize a scatter plot. I could throw one up here. I probably should have prepared one before we did this. I got as far as doing the correlations. Picture a scatter plot and a line through it. So the distance to each point, that is the distance to the line of fit. That's essentially the R. And you talk about least squares. So the best fitting line will have the least distance between all the points as you add it up. That's what it's saying. It's saying the line fits the model and explains it as best possible. So the highest R-squared you can get is the better fit of that line to the model, to the data that you have, right? You get all these scatter points. You want the line to explain that as best you can. So that's what you're looking for of R-squared. The higher R-squared, the more so it's saying that, hey, this line does fit this model and provide meaningful information, right? You can put a line to anything, but some of them will have a really, really low R-squared, which just basically says this is noise. It doesn't have anything, right? You can still chart, a line of best fit, but it just might not be useful at all. So I started off with this is just, production stats, and these were individual inputs that I liked, and you can see I kind of manipulated them in different ways. These are essentially coefficients, right? Ways that I change the value of the stats that go into them. And those numbers are in there because once I found the stats that I liked, I played with the coefficients until I got an R-squared that I was happy with, basically, right? So if I could improve, if I changed the coefficient, made it higher, made it lower, making that stat less or more weighted in my model, and it improved the R-squared, then I left that. And that was a lot of guess and check. I think there's probably more sophisticated ways to do it if you have better tools than just running a 5-variable linear regression in Excel. But that's what I did. So these were the production stats that I was interested in. Essentially, you can see there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 inputs in the main part of my model. And then I do a conference adjustment. I found adjusting for conference to be very, very useful. And it wasn't as strong of an adjustment as I would have thought, right? I basically wanted to like wipe out G5 guys, but I found that when I did that, it reduced the R-squared. The data told me that I shouldn't, completely discount G5 guys, but I should handicap them in the model. CPI. So yeah, the CPI is what I call my model. So this version includes an early declare variable, right? And you can see it improves the correlation a little bit. This includes 40 times a gate. You can see here, basically that's what this is saying. If you had worse than a 4640, I knocked you down a few bigs, actually quite a bit. And then this version of it has the 40, but no early declare. But you can see the early declare was more meaningful. The reason I like to look at the early declare and the not early declare data is because you get some guys like Jahan Dotson who are awesome prospects. And he ranks really well in my model, right? Until you knock him for early declare. But Jahan Dotson is a good wide receiver. He went back for another year. Not all guys that go back for a senior year are bad wide receivers. So I really like to look at both. Dotson isn't completely dead in my model with the early declare, but he certainly comes down quite a bit. So I like having this on hand to see, both sets. There's a bunch of guys like that. Even, like a Devo is much better off before I, run him for an early declare. Guy like Deontay Johnson, is actually pretty good in my model. And then I just for conference, he gets knocked down. So I like to keep this up too, because I do like to see the G5 guys that really shine. Here, Michael Gallup gets knocked in my model badly, but in the raw model, he had pretty good scores. But then this is why we do this, because so did Traquan Smith, right? So I like to see both of them, but ultimately, the last version of my model is including it's not including early declare right now, but it is including draft capital. So you see, I get a 0.54 correlation to points per game with this model. The R squared is less than that. So it correlates highly, but it doesn't necessarily explain all the variance, which is kind of what we're looking at there. So, and I'll show you how to do a regression analysis on this right now. So in Excel, there's an add-on called Excel Miner. So Excel Miner is how you do this stuff, right? Unless you, again, have better tools at your disposal than I do. There's a lot of stuff here. Most of it you don't need. What we want to do is linear regression. And then this is pretty simple. And again, I maybe paid like $10 for this. It might have been free. But if you want to do this, this is the only way to do it that I can make accessible to people. So input Y range. Y is essentially our independent variable. Your dependent variable, right? So this is what we're testing. This is what you're looking for. So for me, it's points per game career, right? And then X range is the independent variable. This is what I'm testing. So what we're really trying to look at here is, does variance in one of these explain variance in the other one of these, right? Does changing this change that output? And the output range, just click on a cell, self output range, just EJ3. Let me see if I can get this. EJ3. There we go. Okay, that was the trick of it. So again, it's finicky. If you don't have these formatted correctly, the way it wants to take them, it's going to kick it back at you. And I honestly fought with this for, I tried to use this last year and got frustrated and quit, but I came back to it this year. All right, so this is what you get when you run linear regression. So, and this specifically is comparing, my draft capital adjusted model to career points per game. So you see my R square is not crazy, you know what I mean? It's 0.287. And yet my data set, you can see, is good, right? I mean, I got Jamar Chase, Olave, Garrett Wilson, Justin Jefferson are the top hits in my model. AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Drake London are up there, CeeDee Lamb. So this is a useful model, in my opinion, right? I am happy using this as part of my process to draft. Not a lot of busts at the top and a lot of elite performers at the top. So I am pleased with this, despite the fact that the R square isn't something that I'm going to brag about. And this is what I was talking about, p-values. So this p-value, and T-stat, all these things mean different stuff, right? These are all useful things. So the p-value being extraordinarily small is is good. It's a 1 point something to the negative, so it's a very low p-value. So that means the null hypothesis that this is random is rejected, essentially. That's what the p-value is saying. So it's good. Another way we can do this, if you want, we can look at, say, let's look at one data point. Say scrimmage yards per team pass attempt. So we're going to take and we're going to plug in DT3, DT146. Okay. We're going to see how that looks. So you can see the R square on this is much lower, right? So scouting with this as a single data point probably wouldn't be very wise. And you look here, oh geez, they overlap the two of them. Yeah, so intercept, p-value here. So still pretty good p-values though, right? You want small p-value. Let me clear this and rerun it just to make sure we're not getting noise. Motherfucker. We'll do a different one too. We'll do receiving yards per team pass attempt. So 3 to DO146, right? Of the range. Got messed up again. You be careful. You click it and you click on something else and it gets all jacked up. Just say EJ3. Okay. Run. Great. So again, lower p-value, better. So, when it's a whole number like this, that's extremely low because it's 4.55 to the negative, this is exponential 0.5. So lower p-value means less effective at randomness. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, Dave. Yeah, lower p-value is better. Let me make sure I'm not full of shit here. Is lower p-value better? Smaller the p-value, the greater the statistical incompatibility of the data with the null hypothesis. That's a bunch of fucking nonsense. But yes, so, right, that's p-values. It's submitting a test that says, hey, this value is actually random. So when you get a really low p-value, it says, wait, that's rejected. This is not random. So something like this, a p-value like 0.92, I think that's not great. You really want to see it be like very, very low. And yeah. But again, like hit up like a David Zach with some of these questions, man. Like he's those guys, even Jake Estes, he yelled at me and said his name wrong the other day. These guys have a little more of an educational background on this. So one of the things you can do, if you wanted, you can take, instead of just doing X range as 1, we can do, say we want to capture it, and this becomes a little more interesting. We're going to capture these 5. So we'll go to DS146. We'll rerun it. So now this is where we're talking about doing like a multiple linear regression. So now we have 5. There we go. I was getting confused on what these are, but so AJ3. There we go. Let's see us. There we go. All right. This is what I was trying to do. So sorry. I hope you bear with me. So now you can see with the correct labels, right? Receiving yards per team pass attempt, games played, p-value 0.08. So 0.08, pretty good. I believe it's 0.05 or less is really what you want, but getting close to that is pretty decent. I might be 0.01. Let me double check that. What is it? What is a meaningful p-value? 0.05 or lower generally, right? So the closer we can get to that, the better. So receiving yards per team pass attempt, games played, 0.089. It's close. Weighted dominator, games played, 0.2. Probably throw it out on the model, right? So same thing, dominator rating, 0.45. Adjusted yards per team pass attempt, 0.05. Scrimmage yards per team play, 0.05. Scrimmage yards per team pass attempt, scrimmage yards per team pass attempt. Oh, per team pass attempt as opposed to team play is even better, 0.039. So you can see this is probably the most significant variable in the model. So now we would kind of take this and maybe throw out, when you see the R squared in this 166. So you now maybe throw out the stuff that had a really bad p-value and reassess, see has it improved, has the model improved. So this is essentially the process. This is how you go about doing it. There's a lot of guessing and checking for me, adjusting coefficients, adjusting weights of things in the model. But that's what you do. So I will show you this one other page. So here's p-tests I ran of like literally every variable. And I can give you this stuff too, if you're watching and you're interested. These were early models. I ran, hey, what does height and weight, does that do anything? R squared, 0.004. No, bad, right? This one I ran, well, receptions best, receptions average, receptions career. Now, all three of these p-values, extremely low. You see the negative 0.06, that's an exponential. So I found that receptions career was very good. Receptions average was even better. And receptions best was the best of the three. That's why I highlighted it in yellow. So this is kind of how my process went as I winnowed out things that were not meaningful, find new variables. Yeah, David. So I think if you have a little bit better software, you can run this with like 40 variables at once, and you don't even have to like do all the work that I did here. You can just be like, hey, tell me the best variables. But yeah, I ran sets of 5 things that I thought were interesting. I tried to be diligent and just run through literally everything. I think I saved results here that were interesting at all. And and went through. And then once I found things that had decent p-value, I put different versions of the model together with them. I certainly didn't use all of these. You can see I only had 7 things in my primary model, and then I added conference adjustments. I added draft capital. I added the gate for 40 time. But yeah, that was my process. A lot of guessing and checking. I spent a lot of nights doing this. I must have put 20, 30 hours into fleshing this out this year after already doing a lot of work in the past couple of years to get to the point of having some idea what I was doing. And and then I'll show you guys. So this is, my data set. This is what it looks like for this year. I will say I put Jalen highlights highlighted because I was talking about him on pod. So generally I keep adding and checking. Yeah, that's what I did, man. Guess and check. It's a brute force method. Doing it with the computer would have been wiser, but I didn't have access to the software to do that. So I do have to go. I am more than happy to answer any questions about this. I'll just say quickly, this is how my model shook out this year. I did add, at the end, I added a film score. I used NFL.com and I adjusted it with that. So Hyatt was really high because they gave him this crazy high film score on NFL.com. I tweaked it down a little bit. They also didn't like JSN, so I changed his film score to what I thought. I watched a ton of film. If you guys watch any of my content, I do a lot of film work, so I felt pretty comfortable adjusting it to what made sense. But sometimes you got to do that. Dave, you're awesome, man. I appreciate you. It makes me happy to know I'm not just talking to myself up here, not just talking to a camera. I really hope some of you guys found this interesting. By all means, hit me up on Twitter, tag me, ask me questions, hop on my Patreon. I'll throw you all this stuff so you have a place to start. And that's it. I got to go. I got to run. I got a thing I got to do. But I'll see you guys soon.